What you'll hear in this video, you won't hear anywhere else. Who is God? What do you know about his origin? Where did he come from? Just think about this. Around 90% of people on the planet believe in God, meaning almost everyone. Around 65% of them are Christians and Muslims, followers of the belief in one God, not multiple gods. This is called monotheism. 65% of 4.5 billion people. 4.5 billion people. And most likely, you're one of them. Now think about this. It's important. What do you know about your God? Ask yourself or a priest about the origin of God, and you'll hear something like, "We call God eternal, so he has no beginning or end." That's why God lives in eternity. We can't say anything about him. But do you know why? Let's move on to the next question. If we can't say anything, who are we believing in? And so we say, God is wisdom, God is the creator, God is justice, God is love, and so on. God is everything wise, loving, rational, eternal, and holy, holding this world in his hands. For us, God is like the sun to a flower or water to a fish. There's no need for a vague or complex explanation. Where did God come from? My 6-year-old son asked me, "Where did God come from?" How should I answer him? The answer is simple. Son, I don't know. The Bible doesn't say anything about it. Oh, honestly, Sasha, according to the Bible, God always was and always will be. But where did he come from? In other words, no one knows anything about the God that everyone believes in. Moreover, even the thought that God might have had a beginning is blasphemous and forbidden, even in the 21st century. And such a person, even today, many would be ready to figuratively burn at the stake. All right, someone might argue and say that they don't care where God came from. What matters to them is that they know God exists, that God created everything, created mankind, and so on. Wonderful. But in such a worldview, the question arises, how did evil appear in the world? The answer, there was an angel, Lucifer. He fell from God and became Satan, starting to do evil. In another video, I will go into detail about the origin of Satan, but for now, I'll just say that there's no verse in the Bible that mentions a fallen angel. Such a verse doesn't exist. But even if it did, how could a good God create a being that was predisposed to evil from the start? After all, this would mean that evil existed before the so-called fallen angel. If God created everything, he must have created evil too. And if he created evil, then he's not as good and kind as we're told. And if he's not that good and kind, why do people believe in such a God? Such elementary reflections arise from the lack of knowledge about the origin of God. Because if he created everything, he must have created evil too. And if he didn't create it, then the concept of evil must have existed before God, or alongside him, created by someone else. In any case, evil, like everything else, couldn't have arisen by itself. If a believer denies that God created evil, then there's only one other option. Evil existed before him. God is anthropomorphic, meaning he is externally similar to a human. So if we don't know who God is, we essentially cannot adequately assess what is true about God and what is a fabrication. And answers like, the human mind cannot comprehend the origin of God, only show that the church cannot say anything about the question, where did God come from? Either it can't or it doesn't want to. Now to the point. What caught my attention is that in the Bible, in Hebrew, or as it's called in the Soviet Bible, the word Elohim is written more than 2,500 times, which translates as gods. This word appears in the very first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You can see that the word Elohim is used, so it wasn't God who created, but gods who created. But in all further translations, the word gods was replaced with the singular form, the word God, even though in Hebrew the word for God in the singular also exists, and it translates as El or Allah. If the ancient author believed that everything was created by one God, he would have written the word God in the singular. However, the truth is that in ancient times, no one believed in just one God. Think, for example, of the Egyptian pantheon of gods, the Sumerian pantheon, and so on. People believed in many gods, and this belief in multiple gods left its mark in the Bible. This is particularly evident in Psalm 81. God stood in the assembly of gods. Among gods, he pronounced judgment. In the Hebrew Masoretic text, this phrase, God stood in the assembly of gods, is written as kelim nevapyat, which translates as God stood in assembly. Or God El is the supreme god of the Canaanite pantheon of gods. More details on this will be provided later. So we can see that even the ancient Jews believed in many gods, among which Yahweh was one of these gods. This is especially clear in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, verse 8. It says, "When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance and scattered the sons of men, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel." The phrase, "according to the number of the sons of Israel," was initially hidden to conceal the ancient Israelite belief in many gods. In Greek texts, dating back to the 4th century AD, this phrase is translated as "according to the number of the angels of God." That is, not the sons of Israel, but the angels of God. And this gives the text an entirely different, radically different meaning. But what's even more interesting is that in the oldest Hebrew scrolls of the Bible, dating back to the 2nd century BC, the so-called Dead Sea Scrolls, instead of the phrase "sons of Israel," it says "sons of Elohim." And as we remember, the ancient Jews understood Elohim as gods. So originally, this phrase was written as "according to the number of the sons of God." It should also be noted that the word Most High, which appears at the beginning of this verse, refers again to that supreme God, or as it's written in Hebrew, Elyon, the Most High. And as we can see, this word consists of his name, God's name, Elyo, or Elyo. So if we read this verse from the start, it would say, "When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance and scattered the sons of men, he set the boundaries of the nations according to the number of the sons of God." This radically changes the meaning of this verse. It turns out that this isn't about humans or the sons of Israel, but about gods. And the fact that verse 8 was originally like this is confirmed by the following verse, verse 9. It says, "For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted inheritance." In this verse, the word Lord is translated as Yahweh in Hebrew. And it turns out that when the supreme God set boundaries for the nations, he divided the nations according to the number of the children of the gods. That is, Yahweh, as one of the gods, was given Jacob, the Jewish people, while all other nations were divided among other gods. Notice this is written in the Bible. In fact, there are many such places, but I won't list them all. I've mentioned them in a separate video that will be dedicated to the polytheism and belief in many gods in Israel. The question remains very strange. Why, after the flood, did Noah and his family adhere to the belief in one God, yet for some reason, Abraham's father, Terah, did not believe in him? Despite the fact that Noah was still alive during the time when Abraham was born, how is this even possible, especially during that strict patriarchal era when everything was passed down from generation to generation, and each generation faithfully preserved its traditions and faith? If the oldest father was alive, he should have passed down his knowledge to his son, and that son should have passed it on to his son. This was supposed to be the case even before Abraham. In this system, this religious line should have been maintained, just as it has been in the Jewish people for thousands of years, even to this day. But the Bible says that this was not the case, and Abraham was essentially the only person on earth who believed in this one God. This is extremely strange. What is remarkable about this fact is the fact that in ancient times, 65% or 99% of the planet's population believed in their gods. How did it happen that today 65% of people believe in the God whom no one believed in a few thousand years ago? Isn't it logical to think that if this God had so few followers, this religion should have faded away? But the fact is clear. Today, people do not believe in Baal, nor in the god Ra, but in the one true God. This is yet another paradox that tells us this could not have happened on its own. Therefore, the belief in one God was either imposed or, in other words, artificially established. Now let's return to the question of the origin of God. What is written in the Bible? At a certain time, God told Abraham to leave the Mesopotamian city of Haran and go where he would direct him. A remarkable fact described in the Jewish Midrashim, texts not included in the official Bible because these texts were written much later than the Old Testament, is as follows. According to the Midrashim, when Abraham was only 3 years old, He looked at the sunset and realized that there was a God above all of this. It's worth noting that Abraham received this revelation exactly at sunset. And then God tells him to leave the land of Sumer and head west. Upon entering the promised land, if we can call it that, he meets the priest Melchizedek, to whom he gives a tenth of everything he has, and who is sent to him by that very God. Now here's the most important point. Melchizedek is called the king and priest of Salem. It is Melchizedek who is the key figure that reveals to us the origin of God. Since the God of Melchizedek is also the God of Abraham, we are left to learn who this God of Melchizedek is. Of course, the Bible does not mention this, but it does say that Melchizedek is the king and priest of the city of Salem. So in the city of Salem, there was a cult of the very God who led Abraham out of Mesopotamia. In ancient times, it was believed that all cities were built by gods, or by the God to whom they were dedicated, and whose name the city bore. Historical facts suggest that the city of Salem is Jerusalem. Jerusalem in translation means founded by Salem. You can read about this on Wikipedia. This is accessible information. Therefore, the ancient city of Jerusalem, the holy city, was the city of the god Salem or Shalem, different pronunciations. Imagine, before the cult of Yahweh was proclaimed in Jerusalem, there existed the cult of the god Salem, whose priest or high priest was Melchizedek, who blessed Abraham. And the most interesting moment, Abraham accepted this blessing because he believed that Melchizedek was a servant of the same God who had revealed himself to Abraham. Now let's look at what we know about the God of Salem. During the excavations of the ancient city of Ugarit in Canaan, texts were found that show that in the land of Canaan, there was a pantheon of gods. The supreme god was El, who was worshipped throughout the region, including in Israel. El had 70 sons, including Salem. But not only him, Salem was born with a twin brother, Shahar. These two gods were the gods of the morning and evening dawn. Shahar was the god of the morning dawn, and Salem was the god of the evening dawn. Do you remember the moment when Abraham received the revelation of the one God while looking at the sunset? It's also worth noting that Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem exactly at sunset, with the appearance of the first star. This is a very interesting coincidence, don't you think? And Jesus always went to pray on the Mount of Olives, meaning on the mountain of God. This also seems strange, doesn't it? Of course, some might say that God's name has long been known. It is Yahweh or Jehovah, the name God revealed to Moses when he appeared to him. But here's what's interesting. The name Yahweh or Jehovah is not a full name, and it translates to I am who I am. In other words, when Moses asked, "What is your name?" God answered, "I am who I am." That is, he did not give his name. It's no coincidence that the most important god of that time was Baal, also the son of El. The cult of Baal was the most widespread, and the Jewish people throughout their history attempted to eradicate it. Baal was the strongest god of that time, which is why his cult was the most powerful. Most likely, if Yahweh had introduced himself to Moses as Salem, no one would have listened to him. After God led the Israelites out of Egypt into the desert, the people erected a golden calf near Mount Sinai. You remember the story with the golden calf, which angered Yahweh. Yahweh ordered about 3,000 people to be killed, and the calf was the symbol of the strongest god of that time. This shows that the Israelites thought they were being led by the strongest God. This fact that Yahweh repeatedly asserted to the people of Israel that he was the God above all gods, that he was the greatest, indicates that he was showing his superiority over other gods. After all, if there were no other gods, there would be no need to prove anything to anyone. We must also consider another remarkable and very eloquent fact about the emergence of monotheism in ancient times. Strangely enough, it appears around the same period, between Abraham and Moses, and in the same region, Egypt. Out of nowhere, the 1,000-year-old religion of Egypt ceased to exist thanks to Pharaoh Akhenaten. By the way, his wife was the famous beauty Nefertiti. So Pharaoh Akhenaten forbade the worship of any gods other than one, the god Aten. This god also has a direct connection to the sunset. He was depicted as a disk with rays stretching out, which could be seen during sunrise or sunset. And although the supreme god was Ra, the sun god, Akhenaten suddenly chose the secondary sun god, Aten, and forced everyone to worship him. With the death of the pharaoh, of course, the cult came to an end. But the fact that this was an attempt at monotheism by a great ancient empire is quite surprising. It is also interesting that it was a secondary sun god that was chosen. This again draws parallels with the god of sunset, with Elim. Now, it is worth mentioning that the Bible contains references to the fact that the ancient Hebrews understood who the god of sunset and the god of sunrise were. Salim and his brother Shahar. In the famous verse from the book of Isaiah, chapter 14, it says, "You are the one, son of the dawn." One is an old Slavic word. In Russian, it would be, "You are the light bringer." In the Latin translation, the term light bringer is rendered as Lucifer, from which the name Satan originated. However, this passage is not about Satan but his son. In Hebrew, it is written, Haile Alban Shahar, meaning you are bright, son of Shahar. Isaiah is writing about the god Shahar and his son Haile. We know virtually nothing about Haile from other parts of the Bible. This suggests that Shahar is most likely the very Satan. I will discuss the origin of Satan in another video, but for now I will say that Shahar, as far as we remember, is the twin brother of Salim, that is, Yahweh. In this video, it becomes clear that everything is very complicated, and it's not as clear and straightforward as the church tells us. Since the church acknowledges that everything was created by the gods, it would also have to acknowledge the existence of life in other worlds. The most important fact is that humanity is far from the most advanced form of life, as we are used to thinking. We will have to accept that gods gave humanity civilization and even created humans. They still maintain their cult on earth in various ways. It is also worth adding that the word Salim, or in Hebrew Shalom, today known as Shalom, meaning peace, just like in Islam, Assalamu alaikum, and even the word Islam, is a root word from Salim, as they share the same consonants, S, L, M. As you probably know, in Hebrew, for a long time, only consonants existed. So in essence, the name of the god Salim is now spoken far more often than any other name, because it is a common greeting in the East. And this god is indeed more understandable to people and corresponds to the behavior of the god Yahweh in the Bible. Since Yahweh gets angry, kills, shows mercy, punishes, behaves like a human, and is jealous, he has emotional characteristics similar to ours, rational beings. This already indicates a lack of impartiality and absoluteness in him, as the church asserts simply because they believe that a god must be that way. And in the case of Elim, it becomes clear why he is not destroyed. It also explains that he did not create evil. It already existed before human history, and most likely, even before the divine history that we know almost nothing about. What can we conclude from this? Humans were created by the gods. One God, Yahweh, the ancient name of Yahweh, Salim or Shalim or Shalemu. He has a twin brother, Shahar, who is the so-called Satan. Yahweh himself is a secondary god in this pantheon, but it is he who, in a mysterious way, was able to overturn the system of the pantheon of gods and make it so that the belief of a small Hebrew tribe grew into the dominant faith in the modern world, a world where not 600,000 people, but 4.5 billion now worship him. And this, as you agree, speaks to the remarkable qualities of Yahweh. Therefore, believers can, of course, fully pride themselves on their God, for his ingenuity and resourcefulness are unparalleled. But now another question arises. Of course, many questions arise, but one of them is, why does he need so many believers? Why does he gather them to himself? But that will be discussed in another video about what Yahweh's plan holds for humanity.